Hey everybody, Greg Pruitt here with Idaho Dispatch, and I am joined today by Mr. Hyrum Erickson, who is a precinct committeeman with the Republican Party. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate taking time out of your busy day to come in and talk Prop 1, because that seems like the big issue that nobody's talking about the elections. I mean, Donald Trump's going to win here in Idaho, so... Yeah. So the Prop 1 is, at least with our readers, was like, hey, can you explain Prop 1? Tell me more about Prop 1. And so my goal was to reach out to both sides. And there's maybe kind of an in-between side there too that we'll talk about. But you have debated in favor of Prop 1. You're in favor of Prop 1. And I guess before I forget, did you have anything to do with the actual initiative, or are you just someone that's in favor of it in terms of drafting and that kind of stuff?
I did not help draft it.
Okay. So however it was set up, was that not, you didn't have anything to do with that? Yeah. Okay, I wondered that when I was interviewing Nick, and I couldn't remember for sure. So, okay, so for people that don't know, we're going to break this down into two sections. We'll talk about the primary, change the primary process as proposed by Prop 1, and then we'll talk about our ranked choice voting portion second. So in the first portion, how does Prop 1 change the primary process? And if you can explain that as best as you can.
So what proposition was, well, let me first say thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity. Proposition 1, the first part of it is a change to the primary. Rather than the current party primaries, it proposes a top 4 nonpartisan open primary, meaning that everybody, regardless of their political party, appears on the same ballot. And it's pretty simple. You go in and you vote for your candidate, and then you're done. And the top 4 vote getters then move on to the general election.
Okay. And that can include a break. I mean, it could be for Republicans or for Democrats or independent. I mean, any mixture of the parties or people that are unaffiliated.
Good. Meaning the people appearing on the primary ballot or the top 4 moving on?
Well, either, right? I mean, either could be. So there could be 4 from one party, or 3 and 1 and 2 and 2, or...
If we're being honest in Idaho, that's probably going to mean that most of the time in statewide elections, you're going to get 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat moving on to the general election. If you might get a Libertarian, 2 Republicans, a Libertarian, and a Democrat. If you've got a particularly strong independent candidate like Ammon Bundy was in the last governor's election, you might get 2 Republicans, an independent, and a Democrat.
Okay. So I guess that would be, so you mentioned that it could be, like you said, and especially even in legislative districts, maybe in places like the Treasure Valley, or, you may end up with, on the primary ballot, 1 Libertarian, 1 Constitution Party, like 8 Republicans and 4 Democrats, and
I would be
probably a little bit higher than
that many, but yeah, sure, that's certainly possible.
Yeah. So I know in talking to Chairman Tony Ulrich with the Constitution Party, part of their concern is like, hey, wait a minute here. In some of these bigger districts, or maybe even the statewide races, they may not ever get a candidate again with the top 4 primary, because, like you said, you're more than likely going to end up with maybe 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and like maybe an Ammon Bundy independent type person can get through. So what do you say to the concerns for like those guys?
Yeah, so in order to explain the impact that Prop 1 would have on third parties, either the Constitution Party or the Libertarian Party or independents, you have to first address ranked choice voting.
Okay.
So are we ready to go there?
Well, we'll put that on the back burner, wait to go to ranked choice voting until we kind of cover some of the primary questions and whatnot.
So I think in statewide races, it is certainly accurate that it will be more challenging for third-party candidates to get on the ballot in a general election, in statewide races.
Okay.
Because it is unlikely, not impossible, but the Constitution Party would have to have a good candidate. They'd have to have one of the top 4 candidates in order to get onto that general election ballot. But it will be much easier for them to actually win elections. Because right now they have a super easy path to the general election ballot, at which point they are entirely irrelevant and will never win anything. And Proposition 1 makes it so if you've got a good independent candidate or a good third-party candidate, you can actually win.
Okay. Okay. I see why you were trying to balance between the two there, so I get it. So, okay, we'll get into that in a minute. I guess maybe my first question should have just been, why are you in favor of Prop 1, or what drove you to be in favor of Prop 1?
Yeah. So, the basic fundamental problem that Proposition 1 is designed to solve is the distortions and unfairness created by the closed Republican primary. And I'll use my district as an example, District 34 in Rexburg. We have not had a contested general election in as long as I can remember, which means that in my district, the only people that matter are registered Republican primary voters. And not only registered Republicans, but the registered Republicans that show up at that primary election, which is a very thin slice of the total electorate. So we've had some highly contested elections, and they've been decided sometimes by a few dozen votes. And yet, there are thousands of unaffiliated voters, independent voters in Madison County that did not get to participate in those elections and did not get to have their say as to which of these 2 candidates was going to represent them in the Idaho House or the Idaho Senate. That is fundamentally unfair. My vote should matter. My vote should not matter more than my neighbor who chooses not to be affiliated with a party. It shouldn't matter more than my neighbor who's a Democrat with whom I disagree about all sorts of things, but he should still get to vote and he should still get input into the process. And right now, as a practical matter, he doesn't.
Okay. So obviously my next question or follow-up would be, what do you say to those who say, look, anybody can register as a Republican, right? Nothing legally stops them from registering. The party can't block someone from registering as a
we're trying our dangest.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as of right now, the current process allows anyone to do it. So is it, some people would say, well, they don't care enough to just change their party affiliation to go in and vote for the person that they want. And I guess the follow-up to that would then be, what do you say to those who are look, the party primary is a nominating process. It's not, like, for instance, you win the primary, you're not actually an elected official until November, and then even then you're not until the following January when you're actually swore in. So if you die in August, you're not an elected official at all. So those would be the next.
So let me do the first one.
Yeah.
Why isn't the appropriate response to Proposition 1 just have everybody register as a Republican? Is that an accurate? Was that the first question? Because
I mean, in theory, that's people who would say, anybody can register a Republican is saying, yeah, you could all just register as Republicans if you want, but not by force, I assume. It would just be you have a choice to.
So I would have 2 responses to that. One is, there is a segment of Idahoans for whom their political independence is very important to them. They don't identify as Republicans. They don't identify as Democrats. They are independents. And the idea that we are going to force these people to join a party that they don't agree with and don't want to affiliate with in order to participate in these elections seems wrong to me. It is unfair to them. I would suggest, as a Republican, it's also not healthy for the Republican Party. We are right now encouraging everyone to register as Republicans, regardless of where they actually are with their politics. And we both know that there are certainly people that are registered as Republicans that have no affinity with the party. And I do not understand why we would be inviting them and, in fact, incentivizing them in. It does not lead to a healthy Republican Party.
Okay.
So that was the first one.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I have a follow-up, but I think it would be better with your second part there.
Okay, and the second question.
That'll be the nominating process.
There you
It's
go.
not- yeah.
Okay, that's accurate. Right now, the party primaries are nominating elections, whatever you want to call them. They are the nominating process of the parties. It is the process by which we as Republicans choose our flag bearer. And that's why, legally, the state can't force the Republican primary open. Because the party is a private organization, they are entitled to use whatever method they want in order to identify their flag bearer. Proposition 1 does not interfere with that. The party would be free to identify whoever we wanted, however we wanted, as the Republican flag bearer. What we wouldn't be able to do is keep other candidates off the ballot. So right now, if you have 2 Republicans or 3 Republicans or 4 Republicans running in an election, the Republican Party, those of us that are registered as Republicans and show up to vote at the primary election, not only choose our flag bearer, we not only choose who we want, we prevent anybody else from appearing on that ballot. We strike the other 3 if there's 4 of them, and they're not available for everybody else, even if that was the most popular candidate. That is a mistake. It is not a great way to design an election system if the goal is to get an election result that is reflective of the preferences of the electorate as a whole. And I would suggest that an election system should be designed to reflect the preferences of the voters.
Okay, but so I guess the counter argument to that would be, if there's 4 Republicans who are in the primary, and currently in most systems in America, right? There's only one Republican going through, 1 Democrat, 1 Independent, so on and so forth. Right now, all the registered Republicans, whether they're all really affiliate or not, are the ones ultimately that choose who's going to go through and represent their party. Wouldn't Prop 1 say, well, all the Republicans get to do it, but we're also going to let Democrats vote who represents a Republican, and let independents and Constitution Party and outside people pick who is going to be, because in Idaho, and I'm sure you know this, that most elections are going to be decided in the primary. I think District 6, District 26, maybe 29, maybe 15 are probably the 4 more battleground districts in the state. Outside of that, a lot of it does take place in the primary. And so, a close race between, let's say, maybe a more moderate Republican and a conservative Republican in a primary. Now, we're basically opening it up and saying, well, now Democrats and all these other third party and independents can come in and decide for themselves.
But those other people are not identifying who the Republican flag bearer is. They're identifying who they want to represent them. The party, you and I, can still decide that we want to go out and support our own candidates. The county committees could decide a month, 2 months before the election, hey, this is our candidate. We're going to go spend money. We're going to go knock doors. We're going to put out yard signs. We are going to support this candidate. And we can go do it, which is what we should be doing. We should be persuading people to vote for our people. We do not need to control who appears on the ballot in order to be able to advocate for our candidates. And there's nothing in Prop 1 that would prevent us as Republicans from doing that.
Sure. Yeah.
I think a lot of the objection, particularly coming from the far right of the Republican Party, is because a lot of the power and a lot of the success of the right wing of the Republican Party over the last 10 years has been because they have been able to beat candidates who are broadly popular within their districts in that closed Republican primary. And I'll give you an example. In the Republican primary, we get about 34% turnout of Republican registered voters. 34% of the Republicans equates to 20% of all the voters. If you have 20% of the voters showing up for an election, that means you need about 11% to win that election. So right now, you have the 11% farthest to the right showing up in Republican primaries, eliminating a candidate that may have a broader appeal, and then their candidate then coasts through in the general election because they're unopposed.
Well, I guess let me ask you though, if the turnout in the primary is always much lower, typically, I don't know that I've ever seen a primary turnout higher than a general election, right? General election is higher. Is there a lot of moderate Republicans who are not voting in the primary? And if that's true, if the people who are already registered are moderates and they're not voting, and we open it up to, let's say the independents and it's all a top four, is it possible that only the more liberal, the more far left people will be voting in the primary, and that the independents who are maybe moderate are just like, we don't really care, we're just going to wait for the general election, and so you're going to end up with just more liberal people voting and selecting Republicans?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Well, I think there's two responses.
Or does my question make sense? Sure. At least? Okay.
Yeah, and I think your question is based on the premise that the people most likely to show up at a primary are the people on the two extremes. And I think it's premised on a belief that the people who are moderate are less engaged and less inclined to show up at a primary election.
I'd say less engaged. Where you're at on the spectrum, what I'm saying is, you could be far right or far left, whatever you want to call it, or somewhere in the middle. The people who are actively watching politics and engaged, they're typically the ones that go out in the primary more than someone who's a Republican that's moderate or even conservative or on the far right that is just like, I don't really care, I'm just going to go vote in the general election, right? So I think the more politically engaged people do seem to show up more than those who are not.
Yes.
In a primary,
sure.
I should say.
And that's going to be true in any election. But turnout is certainly higher in a general.
Sure.
I do not see any reason why we would want the determinative election, the election that decides who is representing us, to be the low turnout election. That does not make sense to me. Everybody in my district should get to participate in the decision of who will represent us in the State House. And that will happen much more effectively in the general election. As far as pushing candidates to the right or to the left in a primary, I don't think so. Candidates that are winning election now are going to be a top 4 candidate under Prop 1. They're going to be there on the ballot in November.
Okay. I had one more primary one and it just escaped me. Oh, so I asked Nick this as well. There's kind of an alternative, I don't know if you want to call it the middle, so to speak, but one argument from some folks has been like, look, the primary process, if we don't get a vote in the primary, then we shouldn't be paying for it, right? If I have to pay taxpayer dollars, and I should have a right to vote in the primary, and some people will start saying, well, look, why don't we just remove the primary process altogether from the taxpayers, and the parties can just control their own primary. That's kind of a middle thing that I started seeing in the comments on some of our articles about Prop 1. And so what are your thoughts on that, whether Prop 1 passes or doesn't pass, that the party does its own thing, the taxpayers no longer have to fund an election, and the parties just
I think Prop 1 fundamentally does that. It removes the state from party politics. Because the purpose of the primary under Prop 1 isn't to identify the party's flag bearer. It's not to identify one Republican and one Democrat. It's to identify the 4 most popular candidates. That's it. And why do you do that? You do that because a general election with 25 people running for governor is unwieldy. It provides significant benefits to have whittled that number down to 4 plausible candidates. And that is what a primary in Proposition 1 does. The parties, when it passes, will absolutely have the opportunity to decide how they're going to run their own, whether it's a primary, whether it's a caucus, whatever it is, the parties are going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. But it gets the party out of it gets the state out of the party primary business, and I think that is a good thing.
So I bet they're still paying for it, right?
Right,
the
but
state is still going to,
but
or the taxpayers, I should
the
say.
taxpayers are paying for it, but they're not paying for what is a party event. They are paying for a state event, a voter event, to identify the 4 most popular candidates. It is fundamentally different.
Okay. Would you be in favor of the state gets not only out of paying for it, but just altogether, there's no primary election anymore. It's just the parties picking who is going to be in the general. If let's say this fails and somebody says, "Hey, look,
Sure.
I'm tired," and that's kind of an alternative idea that was just out there, and I thought,
Boy, I would have to give that some thought, but
Sure.
but the idea that the best candidates appear when you have the 2 parties identifying one candidate each and sending those to the general, I think is flawed. And you can imagine a 50-50 state that's highly competitive, half Republicans, half Democrats, with whether it's state funded or not, a closed Republican primary is going to incentivize those candidates to run to the right. A closed Democratic candidate primary is going to incentivize the Democratic candidate to run to the left. And then coming out of the primaries, you end up with a far right candidate versus a far left candidate, and the 60% of the voters in the middle who just want somebody to fix the potholes and make sure that the schools are well funded and basically do the job of government is stuck with 2 options, neither of which is particularly palatable. The idea that voters' election options should be restricted by parties and party insiders, as the 2 of us are, is fundamentally flawed.
Okay. So I guess that's just a little bit different than saying, well, we want everybody to be able to participate in the primary, and we've closed it off to all these people. But if the parties are just controlling their own thing, these other 60% could try to rally around an independent candidate for the general election. Now, I'm huge hypotheticals here, and I understand the two-party system in America and how that operates, but in keeping in line with the argument that, that would potentially solve the argument of, hey, we're shut out of this process that we're paying for, and so on and so forth. So it seems unlikely, but I was just kind of curious, and there was two sides, and somebody else said, hey, what about this thing? And I'm like, well, I guess I'll see what these guys think. It's nothing I asked you ahead of time, so you didn't know I was going to ask you that, but okay, so let's shift, at least for now. We can come back if there's something you forget or I forget, and go to the ranked choice voting portion. So for those that don't know, if you can break down ranked choice voting, this seems to be where there's a lot more complication. It's a new idea, new system, and
except it's not new. It's been around for a long time.
New to Idaho voters.
That is certainly the case.
Yeah.
Okay, so flowing from the primary to the general election. As we said, in Idaho, you probably get 3 Republicans and 1 Democrat. That immediately creates an obvious vote splitting problem, because you can have the 3 Republicans split 70% of the vote, a Democrat get 30% of the vote, and the Democrat could win. And that is clearly not the right outcome. Again, my premise is election outcomes should be reflective of the preferences of the voters. And a election outcome that is based on vote splitting is not reflective of the preferences of the voters, and it should be avoided. Whenever
so you're kind of talking about like what happened in Alaska. That's kind of the big, what a lot of people bring up, where there's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and I believe the Democrat took 3rd in the first round, right? And then
nope,
or second, maybe they took 2nd, and then ended up winning in the first round.
Nope. You've got that completely wrong, but I can explain it to you.
Yeah. So go back.
So the hypothetical would be 3 Republicans, 1 Democrat in Idaho, and the Democrat wins because of vote splitting.
Okay.
So what ranked choice voting does, and I prefer to call it an instant runoff, because instant runoff more accurately describes the process, and I think gives people a better mental picture of what's happening. So when you go into the ballot box, you don't just mark your one candidate. You mark your preferred candidate, then the next one, then the next one, and then last. The first round, everybody's first place votes are counted. And in Alaska, in their state house races, the vast majority, I want to say it was 60 out of 70 of the elections were determined in the first round. There was no runoff. Somebody got to 50% and they were done. So in order to win, you have to have 50% of the votes. If nobody gets to 50%, then the last place candidate is removed. And if you voted for that candidate, then your next preferred vote counts. So if I voted for candidate D and candidate D is removed because he was in last place, and candidate A was my next choice, then candidate A counts. If necessary, you then repeat that process one more time. And at that point, it's a 2-on-2 race between the 2 remaining candidates, and someone will get to 50%. The benefits of ranked choice voting are that you cannot win elections by having a highly motivated minority. You have to have majority support. And right now, we do have a lot of candidates that are winning elections by having a highly motivated minority of voters in that district showing up and voting for them. And even though the candidate is not broadly popular in the entire district, that's not possible. It encourages coalition building, because it's not enough just to have your voters love you. If 50% of the people love you, you're golden. You win every time, first round, super easy. If not, then you need other people to not hate you. So it disincentivizes scorched earth politics, because you can't piss off 60% of the electorate and win with 40% of the vote. Did that raise questions before we talk about Alaska? Because I'm guessing we're going to
not necessarily from my perspective. I know, I guess someone would say that would it be possible, like in that scenario where you're saying there's no more scorched earth politics, that nobody just really makes a stand on anything because they don't want to make people mad, and so you end up with people who don't.
Yeah, and that's so that was Nick's primary. And I don't think that's the case. You can be bold on public policy. You can be clear as to your principles and your beliefs and not be an ass. It is possible. Right now, Idaho politicians are not very good at it. Those politicians that are talking to, in particular, the right wing of the Republican Party, are very intentionally engaging in scorched earth politics. It's not an accident, it's a strategy. And with the system we currently have set up, it is an effective strategy because it gets out their vote that 11, 15, maybe as high as 20% of the voters get out to vote for them in the Republican primary. It's not an effective strategy if you have to appeal to a broader base, but it can be done. It is entirely possible to be strongly pro-Second Amendment, to be strongly pro-life, and yet to use language that is not intentionally inflammatory. There is people sometimes equate recognizing that the other side is a human being and has thoughts that may have value, even if they disagree with me, as weakness. And it's simply not the case. So I understand where that argument is coming from. I reject it completely. And Ronald Reagan to me is the perfect example of that. He was very strong on his positions, but highly effective as a coalition builder.
Okay. All right. So did we cover just the generic how ranked choice voting? I think you did, because you said
I tried to
get down.
Yeah,
I think so. You did, based on what I remember you saying. So, okay. So one of, I guess, the interesting questions, and I'm supposed to interview Secretary of State Phil McGrain hopefully soon, and maybe he's got more insight. I know there's a letter that came out. I'm sure you're very familiar with the letter. So in Alaska, from my understanding, Alaska has, the state runs the elections. They don't have counties like we have here. We've got 44 counties. So how do these statewide races in particular work when, let's say, there's a governor's race and Governor Little gets 44% because Ammon Bundy ran again and he took up a huge chunk, and the Democrat and then some other Republican, whatever the case may be. Nobody gets to 50%. Sure. How does the ranked choice voting work at that point? Because I don't know. I don't know, because Idaho has banned the computers from going online. They're not supposed to go online. So how do we get all of that information to one place to tabulate a statewide race?
I don't think we know the answer to that question yet. I can think off the top of my head of a couple different options that would all be entirely workable.
Okay.
But that's a question for the Secretary of State. But it's done in Maine. It's done in Alaska, albeit in Alaska, they have issues that we don't have, as they are even more remote than even the most remotest places in Idaho.
So but it can be done then, I guess. If
you are getting outside of my wheelhouse.
Too deep.
I am not the Secretary of State, and I just.
Okay. But I mean, if you're proposing, and not that it was your, again, you didn't have anything to do with drafting the issue, but
sure,
shouldn't that be something that the people proposing it have some idea ahead of time, like, hey, here's how we can do it? I don't know if you've talked to the Prop 1 organizers on, hey, what's the concept here? How do we do this if we can't put everything online? Do we have to mail all the ballots to one central location? I think that's what Phil McGrain said was a possibility, that they would have to kind of be pushed into a central location to have the computers do the tabulation.
Well, you'd be in the same position that I would be. We can sit down and brainstorm some ideas.
Okay.
But no, I that's not a question that I'm
that's fine.
in a position to answer.
Yeah. And I guess, is that the same thing for auditing? Because how does the auditing work?
Auditing is I can answer that one.
Okay.
You can audit it in the same way you can audit any other election. So Ada County right now, you can go online and you can see the actual ballot that you voted on. It's not connected to your name, but the ballots exist and they are there digitally. Alaska does the same thing. There is nothing about ranked choice voting that would make an audit any more difficult or affect the election security at all. Now, if you had to do a hand audit, it would be a little more labor intensive.
Okay.
But that would be the only change.
Okay. Yeah, I just think with a statewide race, and again, I guess the potential issue is we don't know how the audit would necessarily go, because we don't know yet how a statewide race with the instant runoff is going to work to determine, like, if the ballots really were mailed to a central location. If that ended up being the option, how are those audited properly? How are they separated and all that kind of stuff, in terms of these came from this county, so we know how many ballots came from this county, and so on and so forth, right?
Sure.
Okay.
But there's nothing about that would be significantly different than the process is now. I mean, the ballots exist, the digital record of them exists in exactly the same way that our current ballot exists and the current digital record exists.
Okay. A couple other questions on the ranked choice voting side. If you vote, if you go in and you rank all the candidates 1 through 4, is it possible to have 5 at the write-in theory?
I don't think so. Alaska has 5 on theirs, but I could be mistaken.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't think about the write-in until Nick brought it up, and I thought, is there a write-in allowed? I don't remember.
It was on Alaska's ballot.
Okay, but as far as Idaho's go, we don't know if there would be a write-in allowed.
I could, if you want to pause it for a minute.
That's okay. I can maybe pull it up later on and let people know. So if you rank the first candidate only, what happens after that? I know that's a lot of concern with people. If nobody gets to 50% and you only voted or ranked the first person, then you would not have a vote, so to speak, in the instant runoff portion. Is that correct?
So if you vote for, let's say, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, and Aquaman, and you vote for Superman, and you don't like the other 3. So you vote for, actually, let's do this. This is better. Let's do Superman, doofus number 1, doofus number 2, and doofus number 3.
Okay.
And you vote for Superman because you do not care which of the other doofuses wins.
Sure.
They're all the same. So you vote for Superman. If nobody gets to 50% and doofus number 3 is removed, your vote for Superman remains and still counts.
Sure.
The only way that at any point your vote is affected is if your candidate is removed. And the easiest way to conceptualize this is you can imagine, rather than doing an instant runoff, doing an actual runoff. So we're going to put 4 candidates in an election, and if nobody gets to 50%, then we're going to do another election in 2 weeks with the top 3 candidates. We'll remove the bottom guy, or gal as the case may be, and run another election in 3 weeks. And if none of those 3 gets to 50%, then we'll remove the next candidate and we'll just do a head-to-head. The problem with that system is that it's super expensive because you'd have to run potentially three different elections, and it would take forever. So what you are doing is you are doing an instant runoff. You are gathering that data from the voter. Okay, which of these is the person that you would like to vote for? Well, I'd like to vote for Superman. Okay, what if Superman is not available? And it's a runoff election between Wonder Woman, Batman, and Aquaman. Well, then I'll take Wonder Woman. Okay, what if neither Superman nor Aquaman nor Wonder Woman are available, and it's a runoff between Batman and Aquaman? Well, I don't like either of them, but I'll take Batman. It is functionally a runoff election. So if the only person I vote for is Superman, and I don't rank the other three, what I have done is not shown up for that subsequent runoff election, which is entirely reasonable. So let's do the doofus example. Superman, doofus number 1, doofus number 2, and doofus number 3. I only vote for Superman. I literally don't care about the other three. I don't have a preference. If there was a runoff election between doofuses 1, 2, and 3, I'd stay home and watch football. That's an entirely reasonable and rational voter behavior. It's not one that I love, but it's one that they will do. That is the same thing as not ranking them in your ballot. And your vote is never thrown away. You just voted for somebody that lost. That happens all the time.
Sure. I guess, the argument, or I guess maybe you can explain how, and one of the most common arguments I've heard is, well, I want to go in, I'm going to definitely vote for the person I want to vote for. But now you're forcing me to rank and vote people. If I don't, then like you said, you don't participate in the instant runoff if you don't rank them all, and it gets to that point. But you're still kind of putting me in a corner where I have to vote for all 4 candidates and rank them, or I end up not being able to do something. Now, maybe I want to take the time after my person loses to go, man, right now, a lot of people, it would be argued that they barely do the homework on the person they like, let alone 4 different candidates trying to determine that.
So you're making 2 different arguments there. The first one was, at least as I understood it, why are we forcing people to vote for people they don't like?
Yeah, that's a very common counter argument.
Again, these are the 3 candidates that may be in a runoff. If you don't want to show up and vote for any of those 3 candidates because you don't have a preference, then don't show up and vote. That's fine. It's no different than not showing up to vote when those 3 guys are in the election. Your guy was on the bottom. He's no longer available. Of these 3 candidates, which do you prefer? If the answer is, I don't care, then you don't mark a ballot, then you don't fill in a bubble, which is just fine. The second question is, if I understood it right, is what about that an instant runoff is different than a real runoff because of the time in between. The 3 remaining candidates, after you've struck the 4th guy, have that 2 weeks to campaign and prepare. And that's a fair point. You are trading that 2 weeks to prepare for the efficacy and ease of the instant runoff. And if someone would like to propose that we do a top 4 with a 2 week wait or a 1 week wait and run a series of runoff elections, fine. I don't think that would be accepted because it would be prohibitively expensive. But yes, there is a trade-off there.
Yeah, but if it's efficacy and ease, let's go back to the gubernatorial race. I mean, I believe it was at Oakland or maybe it was somewhere else where some of these ranked choice voting places, most of it, I think it's Alaska and Maine, right? The statewide.
Right.
There's cities all over. I think Utah has some cities that do it. Some of those are taking weeks and months to get the results because they're trying to figure out. So, is that a possibility of something happening here?
No.
Why would that not happen?
The reason that that's happening is because in these municipal elections, and these are examples that the right wing of the party consistently uses. They're not cut. They will have 15, 30, 50, just absurd numbers.
Yeah.
That is a completely different beast than what we're talking about here. And the comparison simply is not apt.
Okay. But I mean, it is, okay, so as of right now, you have said, we don't know yet how the statewide race is going to happen in terms of the ranked choice voting. We don't know if Idaho's going to, maybe they repeal the law and say just put it all online. That seems unlikely given the concerns that people have. I don't think anybody would really be comfortable with that.
That's not a thing that's going to happen. Let's not give your viewers the impression that is a thing that's going to happen.
No, and I've said it's banned. I don't think anybody probably on either side is really comfortable with putting that stuff online. Obviously,
voting machines should never touch the internet.
Sure. Okay. So with that in mind, is it entirely possible though that if the Secretary of State says, "Hey, look, the only way to do this is you put it on a thumb drive and you guys drive down here from all over the state, or you fly down." I don't think anybody's probably comfortable mailing the results. So you're literally going to have to bring it in by person. I mean, would that not delay it longer than what people are typically used to? Because here in Idaho, we know the results of almost all the races, unless there's like I'll be honest, some counties are really, really slow. Maybe it's the next day before you find out in some counties who wins a race, that it could delay it by a week or 2 weeks. Is that not possible?
It does not take that long to drive from North Idaho to Boise.
Sure.
No. Phil McGrain is really good at his job. He is smart. He is thorough. I have complete confidence in our Secretary of State and in the county clerks in the various counties to be able to do their jobs well.
Okay. I want to go back to Alaska.
Yeah.
Sorry, before I forget.
Nope. That's good.
So what did you want to bring up about Alaska and how did that go down?
So Alaska, the argument consistently is that somehow ranked choice voting resulted in a Democrat being elected in Alaska. And that's simply not the case.
Okay.
You had 3 primary candidates in the Alaska election. You had a Democrat, you had Sarah Palin, and you had Nick Begich.
Yeah, I couldn't remember the other person's name, but yeah.
Nick Begich is what could be described as a moderate Republican.
Okay.
At least as compared to Sarah Palin. After the first round of elections, the Democrat was ahead with more than 40% of the vote. Sarah Palin and Nick Begich were splitting the
other 60%. Yeah. Okay. I think that's what I had intended to say. I couldn't remember what order they came in. I just remember it was
Begich was, of the 3, Begich was the lowest vote getter. When he was removed, the vast majority of his votes went to Sarah Palin, like 72%.
Okay.
But there were enough Begich voters that voted for the Democrat to push her over the 50%, and not close. Sarah Palin got 45% of the final vote.
Correct.
The Democrat got 55%. It was not a close election. Had Alaska not passed what was for them Proposition 2, what would have happened is Sarah Palin would have won the closed Republican primary, and then she would have gone on to the general and lost to the Democrat, just like she did in this last election. It did not change the outcome of the election in Alaska, but it did allow everybody to vote in the primary.
Yeah, so I guess let me push back maybe on that just a tad or give a counter argument. So you're saying that, had it just been a head-to-head race, she would have lost, Sarah Palin would have lost by the same amount. And I think this is the first Democrat they've had in that district in quite a while, right?
It depends
it's been
on
a
what you
while,
mean.
I think. But
So Alaska, this is your sheet of the makeup.
yeah,
In 2015, Alaska elected a Democratic lieutenant governor. Again in 2017, they had a Democratic senator for like 8 years. The House and the Senate have always been, they've been red but somewhat purple.
but this is the column we're looking at here. This is red
That's right.
until this one.
That's right.
So
But
90%, at least on
the
here, 90%.
implication is that somehow it was unthinkable that Alaska elected a Democrat, and it's not true. They just haven't happened to elect a Democrat to that particular seat.
Yeah,
It would have happened anyway.
But wouldn't the argument be that with ranked choice voting it allowed that to happen? But is it safe to say there are a large segment of Republicans who just say, look, that was the very first race for Alaska having ranked choice voting, right? So is it possible to say, at least in theory, that maybe it wouldn't have gone down that way because this is the first time they're doing it and they're like, I don't know, we're just going to rank these guys this way, that she possibly could have won under the old system but lost under RCD?
No.
Okay.
It was not close. Again, it was a 10-point
Sure.
victory. The Democrat did not squeak by. She stopped Sarah Palin in the head-to-head. And she was always going to stop Sarah Palin in the head-to-head. And the reason is because Sarah Palin is popular in Alaska, just like she is here in Idaho, with either a very strong minority or possibly a slight majority of registered Republican voters. But she's not popular with the independents, and she's not popular with the Democrats, of which there are many. So the Democrat, who is a fairly moderate Democrat, she has not endorsed Kamala Harris this time around, ran a very Alaska-centered race and beat her. So I would say no. The answer to the question is Sarah Palin was never going to come out of Alaska. And in all probability, the Democrat probably loses in 21 days because Sarah Palin is not running this time. Nick Begich is.
Correct. Yeah.
And you end up with a 2-year blip with a Democrat coming out of Alaska, which is the same 2-year blip that we had in Idaho in, what was it, 2008 through 2010?
Yeah, I think so.
When we as Republicans did exactly the same thing. We nominated somebody out of our closed Republican primary that was unpalatable to the general population, and they got beat in the general. This is not an RCV thing. This is a Sarah Palin thing.
Okay. I mean, she was the governor at one point, so it's
She-
kind of an
she
interesting
was.
dynamic there on winning governor, but not winning the congressional
There
seats. That was
there
kind of-
have been some things that have changed with Sarah Palin.
Yeah, that's
Since she
and
was
Alaska.
governor.
So, okay. So I guess the last thing would be, we ran a poll, and it's one poll. I don't know. Did you look at it at all? I don't remember.
I don't
if
think so.
Okay, so we ran a public polling through Zoldak Research, and they did 400, likely voters, and we broke it down by the turnout from the last presidential election in terms of party, how people identified by party and stuff. And it shows the Prop 1 race is close. I think the no was up 5.8% with a margin of plus or minus 4.9. So statistically, could be really close. In there's two interesting key points that I guess I wanted to ask you about. Is one, there's definitely even within Democrats that took the poll, some concerns over ranked choice voting, and that if it showed that if there was a top 4 primary, it probably would have passed if you had separated these two issues. But or if you want to call it an open, whatever you want to call it. But the ranked choice voting part was definitely less popular among both parties compared to the primary change.
Well, and I think the open primaries is the part that matters. That's where the power is. The ranked choice voting is a tool to avoid the vote splitting problem. You cannot, or at least I would not, suggest that a top 4 primary is a good idea without some way to address vote splitting.
Yeah,
That
that's
just
probably
doesn't
why
make any
Washington
sense.
does a top 2
Right.
rather than a top 4. So you
Sure.
either end up with 2 R's or 2
Yep.
D's or 1 R and 1 D.
Right.
So if this fails, is that something you think that Idaho should do? Go to a top 2, or is that
I do not think that it
conversation down
was,
the road?
I do not think that this will fail, and that is not where I've put any of my time
Yeah.
or thought.
Okay. And then the other thing that came out of there was, again, this is all weighted towards turnout in the general from the presidential in terms of out of the 400 respondents, how they did it. There's definitely, I think the Democrat support for it was 74% to, I think 18% of Democrats were opposed. These numbers might be a little off. And then the Republicans, it was 57% opposed and I think 28% in favor. So there's definitely seems to be a high disparity, at least in this one poll. Again, it's one poll, you take it for what it's worth, that there's a lot of Democrat support and not nearly as much Republican support. There's certainly bipartisan support, both for and against, but a heavy Democrat support for that. What would be your response to that?
Well, the only data point that I have is the people that I have talked to.
Sure.
And the vast majority of people that I talk to about this are, in fact, Republicans.
Sure.
Because I'm talking to my friends and neighbors, and I'm in District 34.
Yeah, this is a heavy Republican area. Yeah.
There is wide support for it, because even among Republican voters, the idea that we have to register as a member of a party in order to vote in an election that matters is offensive to them. They don't like it. They don't want to do it. They don't want their neighbors to have to do it. So my conversations with people have led me to believe that this is widely supported. It is not widely supported, or it is strongly opposed by the current leadership of the state Republican Party. They hate it. And they hate it because they are convinced that it will make it harder for their candidates to get elected. And let's be clear, the state Republican Party right now is controlled by the right wing of the party. The office holders that are there are not the center of the Republican Party in the state. And they perceive that it will be harder for them to get their candidates elected, and it will reduce their power. They have been highly effective in their messaging and in doing what they do best, which is talking to that minority of voters that are highly plugged into them and their social media ecosystem. That's not what I hear when I talk to my friends and neighbors.
Okay. I'll get on the national thing here in just a second, and we'll be done. And you can throw whatever other talking points you want to have in there that maybe I haven't asked you or maybe you forgot. So on independence, by the way, independence, I think it was 50% were in favor. It was like 28% were undecided. There was a little bit of undecided with the main parties. And then I think 30% of independents in the poll. Again, in the poll, were opposed, and the researcher seems to think that the ranked choice voting portion is hurting that. And I get what you're saying, like without that in there, then you definitely have 4 or 5 candidates. If the write-ins are allowed, then then you're splitting votes potentially among the Republican candidates or the Democrat candidates, as it may be in a more blue district. He was kind of going back and forth with some guy online the other day and talking about, so you're saying like the far right is basically controlling the Republican Party currently. This would, maybe help tamper that down, or at least make it harder for their candidates that they support to get in. His counter argument was the Communist Party is very much in favor of ranked choice voting. That's the system that they seem to really be pushing right now. I saw a blip. I haven't verified if that's true. I did see somebody took a screenshot. So what would be, if they're the far right, what do you say about the communists?
That is profoundly stupid.
Okay.
I have no idea what the Communist Party thinks about anything, nor do I care even a little bit.
But I mean, in theory, if the third party is better in the general election, which I think you actually said earlier, wouldn't the Communist Party be like, hey, let's do this because we might have a better... Now, is that likely? No, but I mean, in theory, that's maybe why they do support it.
So,
right?
I have no idea.
Okay.
That's just stupid.
Okay.
But let me do address why I think it would be good for third parties, and let's talk about some third parties that actually exist in Idaho and that function.
And there's only 4 currently, just so everybody is aware.
You've got 4 parties in Idaho: the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, and the Constitutional Party.
Correct.
Right now, the reason that third-party candidates can never get any traction, or independent candidates, is because when you get to the general election, even though you're on the ballot, you are forced into a lesser of two evils choice. And let's do Ammon Bundy, the last election. If Idaho were a competitive state, well, people felt free to vote for Ammon Bundy in the last election because they knew Brad Little was going to win. It wasn't going to be competitive, so people could vote for Ammon Bundy. But if you're in a close election, you can't vote for the third party candidate because you might accidentally elect the person that you hate.
Sure.
And that makes it almost impossible for third-party candidates to win, particularly in close elections. Ranked choice voting solves that problem. You can vote for your candidate. If you're a libertarian and that's where you're at, vote for the libertarian. And if the libertarian is eliminated, then your vote for your second candidate, presumably the Republican, then counts. You don't ever have to worry that you are accidentally going to elect the person that you hate the most. It will allow independent candidates and third-party candidates to actually compete in elections, rather than just show up on the ballot, which is what they get to do right now, and then be irrelevant in a general election.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think I don't have any more questions. Do you have anything else that you want to bring up that I don't know about or haven't thought of or haven't?
Let's see. It will allow 270,000 independent voters to vote. It will right-size the Republican Party by no longer incentivizing people who aren't really Republicans and don't want to be Republicans to join it. It's a good thing, and everybody should vote for it.
Okay. I guess now that you mentioned it, I don't know why I didn't ask you this earlier. Governor Little, moderate or not moderate, in your opinion, in terms of how he is as a governor?
Are we using moderate as a synonym for good?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not going to define him. If you're saying he is let's say you think he's a conservative governor, why is he opposed?
I will let Governor Little speak for himself.
Sure.
But okay. If the question is, do I think that he would do well under this system? I think he would do well under
Okay.
this system because he has a broad base of support.
Okay.
He is not relying on the fringes to win.
Yeah. Is that, I mean, there's a large swath of, obviously, the current legislature that has, number one, they banned it. Ranked choice voting in Idaho is banned. This would obviously repeal that.
Right.
And, but most of them, as of right now, there's a handful of Republicans, and then maybe half the Democrats that we reached out to that support it. The most still oppose Prop 1, despite what has happened, and that would run the gamut from people you may identify as far right to Doug Ricks. Actually, I think your senator is opposed to Prop 1, and so I'm just trying to figure out where the opposition would come from people who you would not identify as far right, so to speak.
So,
and that's just your opinion, your guess. I don't know. I'm really kind of fascinated by the whole broad spectrum on both for and against. It's kind of all over the map, and so anyway.
So are you looking for an explanation for why candidates who presumably would benefit from this are opposed to it?
Yeah, I guess that would kind of be that maybe
Sure.
the like you said, you think Governor Little will do really well. Is it just that
I think he'd do fine.
They're not educated on the issue potentially, and so they're
I think the state Republican Party has very intentionally is using every lever of power that they have to kill this. Because again, the state Republican Party, the office holders, represent the far right of the Republican Party. And there are a lot of elected officials that won their election under the current system. They think,
well, that'd be all of them, right?
all of them.
Yeah.
They think they can win their next election under the current system. And they are disinclined to pick a fight with the state party when the state party is so incredibly adamant that on this issue. So I think there are a lot of officials that have decided, this isn't one I'm going to fight.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, anything else?
No, that was fun.
All right. No, I really appreciate the time. I know you're a busy man and I'm going to be heading out and going and having some family time, but I really do appreciate the time.
You're very welcome.
I'm happy to follow up and answer more questions, or maybe you've got more questions for me. So
Absolutely.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, please be on.
Seriously. It's like, no, not bad.